Hello and welcome to the Sky Blue Times YouTube channel. Today I wanted to go through a couple of things from the game against Brighton, the setup that Manchester City had, building on the discussion that we've had in previous videos about that +1 Nico Gonzalez was trying to manage in the middle of the pitch, and then some of the issues that we did see against Brighton. I think over the course of the game there were a lot of reasons why City were successful, as well as why they did struggle in some other moments. Players that had some success but then switched off at different moments, and let's just kind of dive into where I saw some of the bigger issues being with that setup and in this match that eventually lost City the game in the second half. Now, if we just move over to this example here, City played and pressed Brighton a lot so that they could go long into positions that are more favourable for Manchester City to win those long balls, playing into the likes of John Stones, Kusanov, Rodri, Mateus Nunes, etc. All players that are more capable in the air, have a good leap on them. I believe John Stones and Erling Haaland have won near enough all of their aerial duels across the Premier League season. In this match, John Stones, Rodri, Mateus Nunes win all of their aerial duels. So they did set up with the intent to force Brighton into situations where they could win those long balls, and they were able to do that for the most part across this match. At least for those players I mentioned, they were all able to win their aerial duels in this game. And then you've got the likes of Bernardo Silva, Tijani Reinders coming back to be able to win those second balls, manage those situations. As you can see here, outnumber Brighton when it comes to winning that initial aerial duel, and then they have the players to outnumber them when it comes to winning the second ball in the middle of the pitch. Tijani Reinders and Bernardo Silva back there. Now, if we just move over to the press, nice and compact. They wanted to stop Brighton progressing through the middle of the pitch. So you've got Tijani Reinders, Bernardo Silva picking up the two pivots, Oscar Bob and Marmoush quite narrow. Fullbacks of Brighton position quite deep. Manchester City wanted their fullbacks to jump up and press those if Brighton did go wide. Brighton had success in the away game last season, moving through the middle of the pitch against City when they were doing their build-up. So City want to have a lot of pressure on there, force the goalkeeper to go long early, not work great positions to play those long passes into the players further up the pitch. And as I mentioned, stop that progression through the middle. And as we see in this example here, go straight out to their left back to Kuiper. Mateus Nunes already on his way to make that jump. Quite obvious that this kind of system relies on having your fullbacks able to cover that distance. If you're looking at the way that City are setting up and you're an opposition manager, you think if I move my fullbacks really deep, then I'm going to increase the distance that fullback of Manchester City has to cover. Makes it very difficult for him to be able to time that and to cover the distance, even if you are Mateus Nunes. To put enough pressure on the ball, as you can see here, Mateus Nunes only halfway there on his way to press to Kuiper. And then Hinchelwood then makes his move going up. Bernardo Silva tracks him, and then Hinchelwood comes back down. But it forces Brighton to go back to Lewis Dunk, who then plays the long ball over the top. Haaland makes his way across, obviously going from the keeper and then over to the opposition centre-back. And even within this example here, you can see some of the issues where Tijani Reinders was following Baleba, but now he's slightly behind, so he's becoming a bit of a free option. Hinchelwood made the run up the flank and then has come back, so Bernardo Silva tracked him up there, and then Hinchelwood's then dropped back down. Oscar Bob not got anybody he's picking up, as Mateus Nunes just picked up the left back of Brighton. So in here you've got those kind of instances where players need to be switched on about who they're picking up. If Oscar Bob is switched on enough to see Baleba coming across, drops back to block that pass, Tijani Reinders then moves over to track Hinchelwood, because Bernardo Silva is higher up the pitch, and he's actually, as you'll see in this next slide, picked up Danny Welbeck, who's dropped from the back line to give an option for Brighton to be able to build up on that left-hand side. Those are the kind of mix-ups that City will want to iron out over the course of the season. That does come a bit of an issue in this match, which we'll get onto a bit later. To be expected to some extent, being, first few games of the Premier League season, having a short pre-season. No doubt this is an example that they will go through in the video room with the players to try and make sure that these situations don't happen consistently. Obviously, within the kind of world of Premier League football, competitive nature of it, you are going to have instances where you're not going to mark everybody absolutely perfectly. You need to be able to bend under the pressure and deal with it. In this example, they forced Brighton to go long, and then Rodri does win this long ball. You can see the back three that City have after Mateus Nunes has jumped forward. Only the two players that are looking to put pressure on the City back line. Danny Welbeck, as I mentioned, who dropped, and then Bernardo Silva picked him up. But yeah, as we mentioned in the previous slide, you can already see where the holes could be if players, once you're moving them across to one side to try and lock the opposition on one of the flanks, you have to pick up all the players to then stop Brighton from moving back inside and being able to play through your press. So even if the initial phase of that press, as we mentioned at the start, they had a lot of success forcing Brighton to go long into positions that were more favourable for Manchester City. They did well in that instance. There are a few different instances where, and I've got a couple of these in the video, where they do force Brighton out wide and then they go out of play and it ends up being a throw-in. So you have some success there. But if you're not able to close off all of these options to move inside, if your players, your midfielders in particular, are not tracking the players once they move over, then you're still going to have a lot of issues. So in this one, goes over to Rodri. Rodri wins the ball. In the first minute, City pressed Brighton and successfully got the ball back. But as we saw, there are some holes there. Here's another example. Oscar Bob jumps up to press the goalkeeper, coming over across from the left centre-back of Brighton over to the goalkeeper, eventually then forcing him to go long. You can see here Bernardo Silva, Tijani Reinders covering the two pivots. Marmoush quite narrow. Aït-Nouri down here was already halfway on up to press the right back of Brighton if Verbruggen decided to play that ball into him. So as you can see, either side they're looking to jump up their fullbacks to press the opposition fullback. It's a huge distance to cover. Now, having Marmoush on the inside, Reinders coming across, still more than possible to be able to deal with those situations, but you can't be getting mixed up. So if Marmoush is able to curve his run and block that pass back to the centre-back, if Reinders is coming across and picking up Baleba to stop that pass coming back inside, then you can see why that would work. And obviously the trade-off they're making with trying to secure the middle of the pitch and not give up positions and stop Brighton progressing that way. But even if you are pushing them onto the wide areas, you have to be switched on. So on this one, goes long, John Stones able to win this ball. You've got Mateus Nunes, Bernardo Silva, Rodri, Kusanov, etc. coming back. So you've got the numbers to win the long ball and then deal with the second ball situation. On this one, this is an example I've seen people talk about online, and this is the kind of instance of how well does this block move to be able to apply pressure and block those passes. Obviously, they wanted to stop Brighton from moving through the middle of the pitch. You can see how Hinshelwood has moved himself up over here to try and find a little bit of space. You've got Baleba who's going to make this run across here. Reinders keeping his eye. So between Bernardo and Reinders, you need to cover these gaps here between the wingers and Erling Haaland on either side to stop Brighton playing through the middle of the pitch. If you're too much towards the middle, like Reinders is in this case, as he's moving across and Brighton moved it quickly, then the space is up to be able to whip a pass through there. Van Heck is underrated centre-back in my opinion, very good pass through the ball, and he's able to play this pass right here into one of the Brighton players, which would be Gomez, I imagine. So yeah, Reinders then has to make his way across. Aït-Nouri's force, he has to jump and apply pressure and try and stop him playing this pass around a corner to Minter. Obviously you've got Welbeck here on the back line looking to make that running behind. This is Matoma on the other side as well, looking to make that running behind. So with it, by not filling that gap, you've given Brighton quite an easy route to play through the middle of Manchester City. And then if we just play this out across, you can see Aït-Nouri does a really good job to apply pressure, force the pass to Minter back. You've got Kusanov there as well. So then it makes you wonder, what is Tijani Reinders doing in this situation? If Omar Mamouche is coming across and is able to pick up the right back here, then if you're Tijani Reinders, you need to have been tracking Carlos Baleba to stop that pass from going back inside. So if Reinders was more conscious of what Baleba was doing, blocking that pass back inside, if Marmoush continues his run to be able to put pressure on the right back, obviously Aït-Nouri has blocked the pass into Gomez and then coming over to put more pressure onto Minter, then you're going to force Brighton back and be able to manage that situation. But as I mentioned, when you're moving across to either side, whether it's from the press, whether it's from the opposition playing through you, you have to cover these options to prevent the opposition from coming back inside. And in this case with Tijani Reinders, he's come straight towards the ball there and then lost track of Baleba moving into space. Doesn't end up coming to him, but there's a really obvious gap. And in the case of Tijani Reinders, new player coming into Manchester City, only his third game, of course, but still quite experienced player. And this is one of the areas out of possession he must improve over the course of the season. It's not necessarily being about being that player that could dominate all the duels and is just defensive monster. But simple things like this, covering passing lanes, covering players and so on, covering that kind of space, he can definitely do all of these. And when you look at Gundogan and Bernardo Silva and some of our very best players, the players that number 8 in recent years for Manchester City, these have not been players that have been these kind of physical defensive monsters, but they have been in the right place at the right time, applying pressure, moving across the pitch, tracking their man. And when it comes to Tijani Reinders, this is something to keep an eye on over the course of the season. So we just move over to this one. This is where Haaland comes up to presses the right centre-back of Brighton, and then he eventually goes on to the goalkeeper. You can see Tijani Reinders here covering Baleba, Marmoush over on this side, Bob over on this side. We just move it across, goes over to press the goalkeeper, wants to give a lot of pressure to force them along. As you can see, I believe that's Hinshelwood then dropping, Dunk over there. And then Brighton continue to move the ball across, play over to Kuiper over on their left-hand side. Bernardo jumps up to apply pressure onto him to make sure that there is pressure on the ball. And then he plays into Matoma. Matheus Nunes then jumps, applies pressure to him, and then forces the ball out. So if we just look at this graphic here, just an example of one of the presses, for Bruggen playing the ball long over to the Kuiper on the left-hand side, Matheus Nunes is then his job to jump, apply pressure. Whole back line then shifts across, so you've got Minter, Kusanov, Stones tracking, Aït-Nouri, Kusanov, Stones tracking Minter, Gomez and Matoma. Rodri's job is to cover that space in the middle, and if there's a player that goes into that, then he will do so, but primarily you're trying to keep that +1 situation and control the middle of the pitch. So his job is not to get too drawn out wide on that side. Some of the issues that the likes of Kovacic, Gundogan, etc., when playing as the number 6 in these situations, if Welbeck drops, then Kovacic would have followed him, which then would have left the 1v1 at the back, left the middle of the pitch completely free, and then Brighton would be able to then play a ball over the top into that situation. So when you're talking about the number 6 being quite positional and staying close to the middle, that's one of the kind of things that Guardiola is talking about. So he will come across, but not all the way. So then in the situation we saw at the start of the video with that press, it was Bernardo Silva that jumped over and covered Welbeck, and then you had Bob, Haaland, etc. over. Dunk goes back here and then plays the long ball over the top. Rodri's able to pick up. And Baleba's moving across. Reinders doesn't track him well enough. Hinshelwood is also free. So it's these situations here when the ball is coming over to one side, keeping track of who has to pick one another up. If, for example, Welbeck drops here, Bob goes tight to Welbeck. Obviously, Nunes has come up to the Kuiper. Silva and Reinders stay nice and tight to Baleba and Hinshelwood, who haven't made too much movement in the middle. Rodri then nice and central here. Then you can see why the Kuiper would play the ball back to Dunk, and then you stop them being able to progress the ball up the side. But if Welbeck drops into this situation here and nobody picks him up, so Silva, Bob, between the two of them, nobody decides to go and cover him, then that gives the Kuiper the pass back inside, and then Welbeck's able to turn and play a ball over at your back line. So it's really, really important as we go throughout the season that City are able to deal with these situations here. I can understand the process, the intent to be able to defend the middle of the pitch very, very well and stop progression that way, force opposition long. Nothing we're not used to for Manchester City to force opposition long, where we have the back line capable of winning those aerial duels, although in last season we didn't. For the most part, we always have. But once you lock the opposition over to that side, you need to have your midfielders and your winger on the ball side switched on to who they need to cover, as otherwise that can quickly fall apart. So if we move over to second half, I mentioned about the long ball, so it's quite obvious, isn't it? You think about it, where if Brighton are playing these long ball situations and they don't have an extra man there, why not stick another guy up there? And that's what Brighton do with the quadruple sub, around 61 minutes. And as much as I've seen people suggest online, there wasn't a lot of long balls straight away. It was kind of like one there, 5 minutes, maybe another one, 5 more minutes, then another one. It wasn't just constantly playing these long balls. So your first couple, 68 minutes, you see this one here. Ends up with, I think Aitonori gives up the foul in this situation. Could see the extra man, although City still have 6 players there to the 4 of Brighton, so they're set up to be able to deal with that situation still well. Although Rutter is a handful, much more capable of holding up the ball compared to the likes of Welbeck, Matoma, etc. Playing Gomez as well, actually. So Aitonori gives up the foul. They get a free kick from this situation. Doesn't lead to a shot, but you can already see, okay, Brighton are trying something different here, and giving City a little bit more problems. This is another example. Kusanov is able to get in front, gets fouled, and then City have a free kick from the situation. But as you can see, this is now a 4v4. You haven't got Rodri coming back through the middle. So then Brighton are slowly starting to find these situations where they have a bit more advantage with the long balls. But given the players that City have, they were still able to deal with them for the most part quite well. It's the combination of what I mentioned earlier in terms of the build-up, not tracking players, and then having the extra player on the last line when you do play those long balls, which is then ended up being the case for Brighton scoring their game-winning goal, which we'll move on to. So as you can see in this situation, Haaland jumps up to press the keeper. Bob's quite narrow, along with Doku, as I mentioned, with the wingers. They were quite narrow in this. They wanted to stop that central progression. Downside of that is Bob is that little bit too far away to get to the Kuiper and apply enough pressure to stop him playing that long ball. So the ball goes out to the Kuiper here. Bob goes over to press. The Kuiper has the time to be able to play a long ball over the top. Tijani Reinders is coming across, not tight. I believe this is Ayari who he's coming across, not tight enough to him. So he's there nice and free. Rico Lewis has decided to jump, but he's not jumped to pick up Ayari. So who is he picking up? The knock-on effect is then that your entire back line has to shift across. So if we move over to this one here, when De Kuiper plays the ball over the top, Rodri's still picking up that middle space. Your back line's had to move across, so you've got Diaz over here, Aitonori over here. So we've got really a 4v3 in the favour of Brighton here, although Rodri's not too far behind, but you still get the point in that. Stones wins this ball, but instead of hitting it to a player, instead of hitting it out for a throw-in, it goes straight back to Ayari. As you can see here, Rico Lewis who's jumped, Tijani Reinders has moved across. Neither of these two players are nice and tight to him, so he's able to win that second ball. He headers it back on to Rutter, and then eventually Brighton are able to work that into a chance that they're able to score. And as you can see from this frame here, Rodri is in the position really he should be in. You can maybe argue he should be dropped a little bit deeper, and then he's in the position to try and win that second ball and stop that header going across. You could definitely argue that John Stones should hit that ball out of play, and then this situation never transpires. We're looking at City drawing a game 1-1, and you can understand why they may drop points away at Brighton compared to the previous game they've had here and the penalty, and you can kind of blame Nunes and so on, but that's not what happens in this case. Rico Lewis, poorly timed with his jump, not jumping up to press the right guy, so he didn't need to jump and jump onto Ayari. Reinders wasn't tight himself, so those two players would be the kind of biggest culprits in this goal for me. You're going to have occasions where Bob's going to be a little bit behind in the press, especially when we're talking about the 89th minute. But your midfielders have to track the players moving across, and in the case of Rico Lewis, you can't be jumping to nobody as he does in this case. So if he didn't do that, if Rico doesn't jump, say Tijani Reinders is still slow to move across, De Kuiper plays that ball over the top, but because Rico Lewis doesn't jump, you then got Rico with Matoma here, Stones over here, Diaz over here, Aitonori over here. You've still got a 4v4 there, and then Rodri not far behind, just sat in front of the back line. It's a much more manageable situation when Brighton do play a ball over the top compared to when Rico has jumped and caused this. So those are the two things that really have compounded it for Man City. They play that ball over the top. Brighton then work it. Eventually gets to Gruder. Aitonori actually does quite a good job to get back, although he doesn't really make a good effort of playing a block there. And I would say last thing with this is just James Trafford, who, because you've seen Aitonori get back and is able to put enough pressure on the ball and is trying to make a block, then the better thing for James Trafford to do in this situation was to drop back and give himself a better opportunity of making that save rather than how high he is in this situation. But again, very young keeper. First couple games for Manchester City after making the move, you can understand why he'd make that decision. But it definitely is a mistake by him to come out too high, see Aït-Nouri, and then not drop back towards his line. And you'd expect with Donnarumma to not have that kind of issue. With decision making, somebody who's not going to come out as much, whether it is the sweep and so on, and will look to try and be more on his line. But yeah, that last kind of thing to mention. So yeah, if we just move over to this, as I mentioned at the start of the video, that kind of idea of, like, you can understand the intent behind the press. They're trying to stop the opposition playing it through the middle, but then you are forcing them out wide, so you have to be able to deal with those situations when you do lock them over to one side. In the case of Tijjani Reinders, as we saw at the start with some of the pressing, all the way through to the goal that Manchester City concede, he's not tracking these players well enough, the midfielders of the opposition, when they're moving to wide areas. Not tight to Aït, able to compete for that ball. As I mentioned earlier, doesn't have to be this defensive monster that can just dominate duels, but you have to apply pressure on the player and make it difficult for him to be able to win that header, at least to be able to compete with him for it, and Reinders wasn't in a position to do that. Rico Lewis jumping, not getting anywhere near him either, and then forcing the whole back line to shift across and end up in a 4v3. Those are the two biggest problems there. I think Bernardo Silva, for the most part, tracked quite well with the players. But yeah, in the case of Tijjani Reinders, something he has to prove on. And then in the case of Rico Lewis, you'd expect, as we saw in previous games, because he's done those fullback jumps in the press very well in those previous two games. But in this one, he didn't, and he misread it. And that's led to the goal that Brighton have scored. And speaks to a problem that for Manchester City is going to be a consistent one if Rico Lewis and if Matheus Nunes are going to be the right back week in, week out. From what I've seen in this game and the last game, although coming into the season I thought we might be able to get by, I think it's quite clear to me now that January is going to be where they're going to be looking for a new right back. And I think in the meantime, provided you get Josko Vardiol back, provided Nathan Ake maintains a decent level of fitness, I think between the two of them, Lewis and Matheus Nunes, they're going to be weeded out the team. I think Rico is going to be useful in certain games when you want to play to move inside. But I think for the most part, you might see a different solution at right back, given that Matheus Nunes has shown you at any point in the match he can give away a penalty and give away a shot that leads to a good chance for the opposition with his mistakes. And then with Rico Lewis, there's just certain games where he's just not going to be well suited for it, especially if we're playing this kind of system where the fullback's duty to make those jumps. You're then relying on Rico Lewis's athleticism, covering large distances, not his strength. So the setup is just not suited for him for every single type of game, particularly games where we need to press the opposition so high like this. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Please let me know down below your thoughts on the video. Is there something that I've missed? Something you had questions about? Then yeah, everything down below, let me know. I'll jump in with the replies and answer and have those discussions. Please make sure you like the video to help support the channel, subscribe so you don't miss out on the next video, and we'll be back with plenty more content this week.